The sun was warm over the luxury hotel pool, the water glittering like tiny diamonds under the morning light. Guests in bright swimsuits sipped colorful drinks, laughed, and enjoyed the soft music playing in the background on the far side of the pool. A young woman sat alone, wearing a white summer dress and dark sunglasses. She was Emily Hart, the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the city. People often described her as powerful, beautiful, and untouchable. But that morning, she was simply bored. Her eyes wandered lazily across the pool area, watching the staff move around. Waiters carrying trays, lifeguards standing at the edge of the water, cleaners sweeping the tiled floor. That's when her gaze stopped on an older man in a faded uniform, pushing a mop slowly across the floor near the deep end. His dark skin shone slightly under the sun. His movements careful and steady. He wasn't rushing like the others. Instead, he worked with quiet focus, as if each stroke of the mop mattered. He was the hotel's janitor. His name was Daniel. Most people barely noticed him. Some guests even looked at him with mild annoyance when they had to step around him. But Emily noticed something different. There was a calmness in his face, a dignity in his posture that made her curious. She took a sip of her coffee, still watching him. Daniel eventually straightened his back and glanced toward the pool. His eyes passed over the crowd without stopping until they met hers. For a brief second, their gazes locked. He quickly looked away, as if embarrassed to have been caught staring. Emily didn't know why, but something inside her stirred. She had attended countless business meetings, signed million-dollar contracts, and met powerful people from all over the world. Yet no one's simple glance had ever made her feel this strange mix of interest and warmth. A few minutes later, Daniel parked his cleaning cart near the poolside and took a short break. He sat down on the edge of the tiled floor, his feet just short of touching the water. From where she sat, Emily could see him take a deep breath, like a man who had carried a heavy load for far too long. Her mind told her to ignore it. After all, she didn't even know him. But her heart pushed her forward. She stood, walking toward him with slow, confident steps. Several guests noticed and whispered to each other. The CEO walking toward the janitor was not something they saw every day. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Daniel looked up, startled. He glanced around, as if checking if she was speaking to someone else. When he realized she meant him, he gave a small nod. Emily sat beside him, close enough to see the lines on his face, the tiredness in his eyes, and yet there was kindness there too. "You look like you've seen many things," she said, smiling faintly. Daniel hesitated. His hands rested on his knees, and for a moment it seemed he might just shrug and stay silent. Then he said, "You wouldn't believe where I've been, Emily?" Leaned in slightly, her curiosity growing. "Try me," she replied. He looked at the water for a few seconds before speaking again. His voice was calm, but there was a weight in every word. "I've seen hard days, ma'am. Days that test the soul." Something about the way he said it made the noise of the pool fade into the background for Emily. The laughter, the splashes, the clinking of glasses, it all disappeared. It was as if the world had shrunk down to just them. Sitting by the water's edge, she wanted to ask more, but also didn't want to push him too quickly. "I'm Emily," she offered. "And you are?" "Daniel," he replied simply. There was a short silence, comfortable in its own way. Emily noticed how he kept glancing at the guests, enjoying themselves, not with envy, but with a kind of quiet acceptance. She wondered how many of them had ever spoken to him, or even bothered to know his name. Finally, she asked, "Would you tell me your story?" Daniel looked at her again, this time holding her gaze a little longer. "Are you sure you want to hear it?" "Us," Emily said. "Without hesitation, I think." "I need to." Daniel gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, and said, "All right then. But don't say I didn't warn you." And in that moment, something unspoken passed between the man, invisible thread pulling two very different worlds together. Neither of them knowing just how much this conversation by the pool would change their lives forever. Daniel rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the calm water. The gentle ripples seemed to pull memories from the deepest corners of his mind. Emily sat quietly beside him, giving him time. She didn't rush him, didn't fill the silence. With useless words, she simply waited. "When I was a boy," Daniel began slowly. "My world was small." He paused, as if tasting the words before letting them out. "A small house, one bedroom, a leaky roof, and a kitchen where my mother worked from morning to night." Emily's eyes softened. She could almost picture it, the smell of boiled rice, the sound of rain dripping through holes in the ceiling, the tired face of a woman who worked too hard. "For too little, my father," Daniel continued, "was a kind man. But kindness doesn't always put food on the table." He shook his head lightly. "He passed away when I was 12. Heart failure." His voice dipped lower. "That was the day I stopped being a child." Emily felt a small ache in her chest. She wanted to say she was sorry, but somehow the words felt too small. So she stayed silent, letting him speak. "I had 2 younger sisters," Daniel said. "They were just little girls. They didn't understand why their big brother suddenly left school to work. They just knew I wasn't around as much." He glanced at his hands, which were rough from years of labor. "At 15, I worked 3 jobs, cleaning, unloading trucks, and washing dishes in a cafe." Emily could hear the distant laughter of children at the pool. But in her mind, she could see a young boy walking home at night, too tired to lift his head, his shoes worn out. "There were nights," Daniel continued, "when I would pretend I'd already eaten so my sisters could have more." His lips curved into a sad smile. "My mother never asked, but she knew. Mothers always know." Emily finally spoke, her voice soft. "That must have been so hard." Daniel gave a small shrug. "When you love people, you do what you must." His tone was simple, but it carried a weight that made Emily's throat tighten. The sound of a ball splashing into the water brought Daniel's eyes back to the pool. He watched the children play for a moment before saying, "I thought maybe life would get better when I grew older. But," his voice trailed off. Emily leaned in slightly. "But what?" Daniel took a slow breath. "But life had other plans." He looked out into the distance. "When I was 23, I met someone." Lena, Emily's brows lifted gently. The way he said her name was different, tender, almost sacred. "She was." He smiled faintly. "She was the light in my dark little world. Beautiful, kind, stubborn as a storm." His eyes softened as he remembered. "We didn't have much, but we had dreams. We wanted to open a small cafe, a place with good food and warm smiles." Emily could almost see it, a cozy cafe on a street corner. Warm light spilling from the windows. Lena behind the counter laughing with Daniel as they served customers. But before we could make it real, Daniel's voice cracked. It all ended. He closed his eyes for a moment. A drunk driver ran a red light. We were coming back from the market. His hand clenched slightly. She didn't survive. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't expect the sharp pain in her chest, but it was there, as if some part of her shared his loss. Daniel looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. I held her hand. Until the ambulance came, I kept thinking she'd open her eyes, tell me it was okay, but she never did. The sound of the pool seemed far away now. The sun was still bright, but the world around them felt heavier. What did you do after? Emily asked gently. Daniel gave a hollow chuckle. What can you do? You wake up, you work, you sleep. You stop dreaming. He glanced at her. Dreams hurt too much when they die. Emily wanted to reach out, to place her hand over his. But she didn't. Something told her he wasn't ready for comfort. Not yet. And that's how I ended. Up here, Daniel said, cleaning floors in a place I'll never afford to stay in, watching lives that are nothing like mine pass by every day. But you're still here, Emily said softly. You didn't give up completely, Daniel. Gave her a long look, his eyes tired but calm. Maybe not, but some days. I wonder why I keep going. Emily felt something inside her shift. She didn't just see him as a janitor anymore. She saw a man who had carried more loss than most could bear, and still stood tall. Daniel, she said quietly, I'm glad. You're still here for the first time that morning. He smiled, just a small, fleeting smile. But it was real, and somehow. Emily knew this was only the beginning of a story she was meant to hear to the end. The morning sun had shifted higher, casting bright sparkles over the pool's surface. But between Emily and Daniel, the air felt heavier. She could see it in his eyes, those quiet storms that never truly fade. He looked toward the water as if it might wash away the weight of his memories. After Lena died, Daniel began again. I didn't know what to do with myself. His voice was low, almost as if he feared speaking too loudly would make the pain sharper. Emily listened in. Silence, letting him guide the story for weeks. I couldn't go home, he said. Every corner of that place reminded me of her. The couch where she read books, the kitchen where we tried to make new recipes, the doorway where she'd kiss me before I left for work. His fingers tightened around his knees. It was like she was everywhere. But gone at the same time, Emily's heart twisted. She had lost people before, but never like that. Never someone who was part of her daily heartbeat. Daniel gave a bitter little laugh. We had this book. You know, he said, a worn-out notebook with all our plans for the cafe, the name, the menu, even the color of the walls. We'd sit for hours dreaming about it. His voice wavered. I couldn't even look at it after she was gone. I put it in a box, shoved it to the back of a closet, and locked the door. Emily imagined that lonely box, holding not just paper and ink but years of love and hope, now trapped away, he continued. I went back to working every job I could find. I didn't care what it was, janitor, porter, loading crates at the docks, anything that kept me too tired to think when I got home. He looked down at the clean tiles beneath their feet. Maybe that's why I stayed here so long. It's easier to survive when you're just moving, not thinking. Emily shifted slightly toward him. But you kept going, she said softly. You didn't let it destroy you. Daniel's lips curved faintly, though it wasn't quite a sob. Smile, I didn't have a choice. My sisters had their own families by then. And I started helping with their kids. I thought, if I couldn't save my dreams, maybe I could help someone else's. There was a warmth in his voice now, a small flicker of light through the shadows. I sent them money for school uniforms, for books, for food. When times got bad, I didn't have much, but it was enough to keep them moving forward. Emily's chest swelled with admiration. She had grown up in a world where help was expected and resources were endless. Daniel's world was the opposite. Help was rare and giving. It meant sacrifice. Still, she could sense the deeper wound, the one not healed by time or generosity. Do you ever think about her? She asked carefully. Every day, Daniel admitted without hesitation. Some days it hurts like it happened yesterday. Some days it's softer, like a song you used to know by heart. But it's always there. He tapped his chest lightly. Right here, Emily swallowed hard, wanting to ask something but unsure if she should. Finally, she said, Do you think you'll ever love again? Daniel's gaze turned toward her slowly. His eyes searched hers, not suspiciously, but with a kind of quiet wonder. I don't know, he said honestly. Love is dangerous. It gives you the best reason to live. But when it's taken away, it can take all your reasons with it. Emily felt those words settle deep inside her. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was warning her, too, I think. She said gently that sometimes the heart waits for someone. Not to replace what was lost, but to help carry it. Daniel didn't answer right away, but his eyes softened. For a brief moment, he seemed to see her not as a wealthy guest in a pretty dress, but as someone who could understand, someone who might be able to stand beside him without trying to erase the past. The sound of the pool returned gradually, the splashing of children, the chatter of guests, the clink of glasses, but for Emily, none of it mattered. She was lost in the quiet gravity between them. A waiter passed by, offering her another drink. She waved him away without looking. Her mind was still on Daniel's words, on the image of a young man burying his dreams in a box because the love of his life was gone. Finally, she said, "Daniel, thank you for telling me." He gave a slow nod. "Not many people ask," he murmured. "And fewer stay to listen." Emily met his gaze steadily. "Then maybe it's time more people did." For the first time since they started talking, Daniel's lips curved into a real smile. It was small, but it carried warmth. The kind that lingers, and though neither of them said it, both knew something had shifted. This was no longer just a conversation between a CEO and a janitor by the pool. This was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, something that might just rewrite both their lives. The breeze by the pool carried the faint scent of fresh flowers from the hotel garden. Emily sat there, still thinking about every word Daniel had shared, the picture of him as a young man full of dreams. Then, carrying unbearable loss lingered in her mind, but there was something else too. Something she had noticed even before she approached him. It was the way he carried himself, not with pride in money or status, but with quiet dignity. She tilted her head slightly and asked, "Daniel, why this hotel? All the places you could work, why here?" Daniel glanced toward the tall glass building that loomed over them. "It's not for me," he said simply. "It's for the young ones." Emily frowned a little, curious. "The young ones?" "My nieces and nephews," Daniel replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "My sister's children. They've got bright minds, better than mine ever was. I send most of what I make to help them with school." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You mean you work here just so they can have a better life?" Daniel nodded. "Every paycheck, I keep only enough for food and rent. The rest goes to them: fees, books, uniforms, sometimes even bus money." He looked down at his hands. "I promised myself I'd give them the chance I never had." For a moment, Emily was speechless. In her world, people often gave to charity, but they did it with extra money they wouldn't miss. Daniel was giving away almost everything. "That's incredible," she finally said softly. Daniel shrugged. "It's just what family does." He looked out at the pool again, his gaze calm. "When you love people, you don't measure the cost." Emily studied his face. Every line told a story of work, of hardship, of years spent putting others before himself. She couldn't help but think about the contrast between them. She had millions in the bank, yet here was a man with little who gave more than most wealthy people she knew. "Do they know?" she asked. "Do your nieces and nephews understand what you're doing for them?" Daniel smiled faintly. "They thanked me, but I don't want their thanks. I just want them to grow, to be happy, to not be stuck where I was." His voice was steady, but Emily caught the faint shimmer in his eyes. The sound of water splashing nearby broke the moment. A young boy had dropped his ice cream into the pool and was crying. Daniel stood up without hesitation, walked over, and knelt beside him. He spoke gently, calmed the boy, and even promised to get him another cone. The child's tears stopped, instantly replaced by a shy smile. Emily watched the scene with a strange warmth in her chest. Daniel didn't just work here, he touched lives quietly, without expecting anything in return. When he returned, she said, "You didn't have to do that." Daniel chuckled. Sometimes the smallest kindness stays with someone the longest. Emily leaned back slightly, letting his words sink in. She couldn't remember the last time she had met someone so genuine, so unshaken by the noise of status and wealth. "Daniel," she said suddenly, "would you let me do something for you?" He shook his head almost instantly. "No, Miss Hart. You've already done more than enough by just listening." She tilted her head with a small smile. "It's Emily, and I'm not offering out of pity. I want to help because you inspire me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to people offering without wanting something in return. Emily decided not to press the matter. Instead, she changed the subject. "You know, you remind me of my grandfather." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "Oh, and what was he like?" She smiled. "He built his life from nothing, never forgot where he came from, and he believed that the real measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they gave." Daniel's expression softened. "Sounds like a wise man." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the warm afternoon wrapping around them like a blanket, the laughter of children, the gentle music, the soft lapping of water against the pool's edge, all blended into a peaceful background. Emily realized she wanted to know more, to see beyond the layers of hardship and sacrifice. "Daniel, if you could have one wish, anything in the world, what would it be?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "I'd like to see them all graduate, every single one of them, and maybe," he hesitated, "maybe I'd like to walk into that little cafe Lena and I dreamed of, even if it's only in my mind." Emily's throat tightened. There was something about the way he said it, not bitter, not regretful, just quietly accepting, that made her heart ache. She didn't know it yet, but that afternoon, sitting by the pool with the janitor who had given away so much, a seed had been planted in her own heart, a seed of admiration, respect, and something deeper, something that could not be explained away as simple kindness. And as the sun dipped slightly toward the horizon, she realized she didn't just want to hear the rest of his story, she wanted to be part of it. The days after their first long conversation seemed to move differently for Emily. She still attended meetings and answered endless business calls. But every morning her thoughts drifted toward the hotel pool. She found herself waking earlier than usual, almost eager to see if Daniel would be there, and he always was, pushing his mop with that same steady rhythm, greeting other staff with a quiet nod, never calling attention to himself at first. She thought their talk by the pool might have been a one-time thing, a rare crossing of two worlds, but each day she found herself walking toward him, sometimes with a coffee in hand, sometimes with nothing but a smile. They spoke about simple things at first: the weather, the flowers in the hotel garden, the music playing from the speakers, but slowly their conversations began to wander into deeper territory. Daniel would tell her little stories from his childhood, and Emily would share small secrets about the pressures of running a company. It felt easy, and yet it wasn't easy at all. Guests began to notice. Some whispered behind their hands. Others stared openly to them. It was strange seeing the elegant CEO in her designer dresses sitting beside a janitor on a pool chair. One morning, as Emily approached, she overheard two women by the bar. "It's embarrassing," one said. "She could have anyone, and she's talking to him." The other laughed softly. "Must be some kind of charity project." Emily felt a hot flash of anger. She wanted to turn and tell them they knew nothing, but she kept walking. When she reached Daniel, she forced a smile, but he had already seen the shadow in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "Nothing important," she replied, sitting down beside him. But her voice lacked its usual lightness. Daniel didn't push. He had learned long ago that some truths revealed themselves in time. Still, she could see in his eyes that he understood more than she said. That evening, the hotel hosted a small dinner event for select guests. Emily was expected to attend. She dressed in a simple black gown. elegant but understated. As she stepped outside for some air, she saw Daniel near the side garden, checking the lantern lights without thinking. She walked toward him. "You're not inside?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Not really my kind of place." Emily hesitated for a moment, then said, "Come with me." He blinked. "To the dinner." "Miss Hart, it's Emily," she interrupted softly. "And yes, to the dinner. Jess." As my guest, he looked at her, uncertain. "People will talk. Let them," she said, her voice steady. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded. He didn't change clothes. Didn't try to look like someone else. He walked in beside her in his simple uniform, and Emily held her head high inside. The whispers started almost instantly. Some guests offered polite smiles. Others didn't bother to hide their judgment, but Emily kept her focus on Daniel, introducing him to people as if he belonged there, which, in her eyes, he did. After the dinner, they returned to the quiet of the pool area. The water shimmered under the soft lights, and for a while, they simply sat there, letting the stillness wrap around them. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said quietly. "You didn't have to walk in with me like that." Emily turned to him. "Yes, I did," she said, "because I'm not ashamed of being seen with you, Daniel. I like being with you." He looked at her carefully, searching her face for any sign that it was just pity or curiosity. But all he saw was truth. "I'm just a janitor," he murmured. She shook her head. "No, you're more than that. You're someone who's taught me more about kindness in a week than I've learned in years." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence where hearts speak louder than words. Daniel finally said, "Emily, you're crossing a line, and I don't know if it's a line we should cross." She smiled softly. Maybe some lines are meant to be crossed. The reflection of the pool's lights danced in their eyes as they sat there, side by side, two people from different worlds. Yet somehow, in that moment, they belonged in the same one. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but both knew that whatever came next, they were already too far to turn back. The night was quiet, except for the soft hum of the pools filter. The sky above was painted deep blue, with a silver moon hanging low. Emily and Daniel sat by the water, their reflections shimmering in the ripples. It had been a long day. Emily had spent most of it in meetings, but her mind kept drifting back to him. When she finally stepped out into the cool night air and found him sitting alone by the pool, it felt like the rest of the world had faded away. Daniel didn't speak at first. He just stared at the water, his elbows resting on his knees. Emily sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. He glanced at her, then back at the water. "Some nights are like that," he replied. "You just think more than you talk." Emily smiled faintly. "And what are you thinking about?" Daniel hesitated. "About the line we talked about, the one I said we shouldn't cross." Her heart skipped a beat. She had been thinking about it too every day. In fact, since he had said it. "And?" she asked carefully. He took a slow breath. "And I think I'm already halfway over it." Emily's chest tightened. "Daniel." He shook his head slightly, as if trying to make sense of his own words. "You've been in my thoughts more than I care to admit. I tell myself you're just being kind, that this will fade, but it hasn't." The sound of water lapping against the tiles filled the pause. Emily felt the weight of his words, heavy and delicate at the same time. "I didn't plan for this," Daniel continued. "I've lived most of my life keeping my head down, never wanting to want something I couldn't have." He looked at her now, his gaze steady. "But you make me forget all those rules I set for myself." Emily's breath caught. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twisting slightly. "Daniel, you should know something," she said, her voice almost a whisper. He waited, eyes locked on hers. I've met hundreds of men, she began. Men with money, power, fame. But none of them made me feel safe the way you do. None of them made me feel like I could just be myself, she swallowed, her voice trembling slightly. I think I've fallen for you, for a moment. Daniel just stared at her. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before rain falls. Emily, he said slowly, do you understand what that means? For you? For me. I don't care what people think, she replied firmly. I care about how I feel when I'm with you, and I feel. Right. Daniel's jaw tightened, not out of anger, but out of the battle raging inside him. You deserve someone who can give you more, he said. I'm not a man with a big house or fancy things. I don't belong in your world, Emily. Reached out and placed her hand gently over his. Maybe my world isn't where I'm supposed to be anymore, she whispered. He looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes, searching for doubt. But all he saw was certainty. You're not afraid? He asked, only of losing the chance to know what this could be. She answered. For a long moment, neither moved. The sound of the pool, the distant hum of the city, the gentle night breeze, they all seemed to fade. Finally, Daniel let out a slow breath. Emily. I haven't let anyone close since Lena, he admitted. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think I could. I thought that part of me was gone, and now? She asked softly. He gave a small, almost shy smile. Now I think. Maybe I was just waiting for the right person to prove me wrong. Her heart swelled. And for a brief moment, she felt the world tilt into place. The barriers between them were still there. But in that moment, they seemed smaller. The moonlight glimmered on the surface of the water as they sat in the quiet, neither rushing the moment. Daniel's hand, rough from years of work, rested under hers, solid and steady. Emily knew this. Wasn't a fairy tale, wouldn't be easy, but it was real, and that was enough. And as the night deepened, the unspoken truth settled between them. They had crossed the line, and neither wanted to go back. The days after that night by the pool felt different. Emily noticed it in the way Daniel smiled now, the small, polite smile he used to give, but something warmer, freer, as if a part of him had finally decided to step into the light. They still met every morning, sometimes by the pool. Sometimes in the quiet corner of the hotel garden. Emily brought him coffee, and Daniel brought her stories, some from his childhood, others from his years of work. Each conversation stitched them closer together, thread by invisible thread. But not everyone was happy about it. Word had spread among the hotel guests and even some of Emily's business contacts. People whispered, some openly questioned her choices. A CEO with a janitor? It's not right, they'd say. Others claimed she was ruining her image. Emily didn't care, but she knew Daniel worried. One afternoon, as they walked past the lobby together, he stopped and said quietly, Emily, this could hurt you. People in your world don't forget things like this. She looked at him steadily. Then let them remember. I'm not hiding. Daniel studied her for a moment, then shook his head with a small smile. You're braver than I am? No, she replied. I just know what's worth fighting for. A week later, Emily made a choice that would silence the whispers or make them louder forever. She invited Daniel to an important charity gala, the kind of event where every camera in the city would be watching. When the night came, Daniel almost didn't go. He stood in his small apartment, staring at the suit she had sent for him. It was simple, but well-fitted, something that made him feel both proud and nervous. Finally, he took a deep breath and put it on. At the gala, heads turned the moment they walked in. Emily in an elegant silver gown, Daniel at her side. Their hands brushed occasionally as they moved through the crowd, and though they didn't hold hands, the connection between them was clear. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. Ms. Hart, who is your guest tonight? Emily didn't hesitate. "This is Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "He's someone I admire greatly, and someone I'm proud to have in my life." The words hung in the air, cameras flashing around them. Daniel felt a strange mix of embarrassment and gratitude. But mostly, he felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years, after the event. They returned to the hotel, walking together through the quiet lobby. Daniel stopped near the pool, the place where it all began. The water shimmered under the soft lights, reflecting their faces side by side. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "You didn't have to tell the whole world." Emily smiled gently. "Daniel, I want the world to know. Because I'm not just proud of you. I'm proud to be with you." For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had spent so much of his life believing he wasn't enough for someone like her. And here she was, telling him the opposite. "You've changed my life," he said finally. "Not with money, not with gifts, but by seeing me, really seeing me. And I didn't think anyone would ever do that again." Emily reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "You've changed mine too, Daniel. You've shown me what love looks like when it's not bought or polished, but real." The soft sound of the water filled the quiet that followed. Daniel squeezed her hand, his voice low but certain. "Then let's not waste any more time." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, whatever this is, let's live it. No hiding, no fear." Her smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that." From that night on, they didn't care who saw them together. Emily would meet him after his shifts, sometimes sharing dinner in the staff kitchen, sometimes walking through the city late at night. They laughed, they argued. They learned each other's rhythms. Months later, Daniel's nieces and nephews graduated, all of them smiling proudly in their caps and gowns. Emily stood beside him at the ceremony, her arm linked with his. She saw the pride in his eyes, and in that moment, she understood this was his legacy, and she was honored to be part of it. Later that evening, as the sun set, they found themselves back at the hotel pool, the place where it all began. Emily leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about how unlikely this was?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Every day," he said, "and I thank the stars for it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the ripples dance across the water. The world outside still had opinions. But in that moment, it didn't matter, because love had found its place, not in status, but in the simple truth of two hearts choosing each other, without barriers, without fear, and without regret.